This episode is brought to you by Early Innings, an anthology of the first 4 years of the Twin Bill. Featuring over 200 pages of baseball poetry, short stories, essays, interviews, comics, and art, it tells the story of what it means to love baseball today. The Athletic's Tyler Kepner said, "Like a box of ballpark Cracker Jack, there's a delightful surprise on every page of the Twin Bill's Early Innings. This is a collection to be savored, a loving and lyrical celebration of the art of baseball." Early Innings is available now from 406 Press. This episode is also brought to you by Ben Shahan's Short Relief. It asks the question of what happens when men are not ready to give up that boys' game, the national pastime. In 9 stories, he traces the stories of a minor league pitcher holding on to his last shred of hope for promotion to the show, little leaguers' formative experiences, and a host of men and boys in between. Short Relief is out on 406 Press and available at 406press.com. Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bolohan. Scott D. Peterson's novel, A Month of Day Games, follows the baseball-obsessed Mallet family living in small-town Maine in 2004. With more than a little influence from James Joyce, this isn't your typical baseball novel. We had a fantastic chat. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Scott. How are you doing today?
Doing well, Scott.
I always like to start off by asking my guests, where does this idea for this book originate from?
I've been a fan of connected short stories for a long time. Linked stories, novel-and stories. Winesburg, Ohio by Sherwood Anderson is a favorite. The Love Stories by Louise Erdrich. And so I've often liked the idea of having stories linked by a common character or characters. So when I started writing these stories and they started kind of coalescing, and then a friend said, maybe have a novel and linked short stories here. And I started thinking that he was right. And so I just started kind of looking for ways to connect.
You didn't start off with the idea like this was going to be a book, this was going to be a novel. It started off as short stories, essentially.
Yes. But I was setting them in a small town in Maine that was patterned after where I was living in Orono, Maine. And I started seeing again that I could use the Mallet family became the center pretty quickly. And I started thinking how I could use the short stories to tell different aspects or show different aspects of the Mallet family from different perspectives of their friends and neighbors and co-coaches, assistant coaches, and seeing that I could use them to help the reader start to understand the Mallet family. And then I got the idea for the novella, which would then be what everything is pointing toward in this summer of 24/7 baseball for the Mallet family.
Gosh, so many questions here. I want to start with the title of the book, A Month of Game Days. How'd you come up with the title for the book?
There's a line, I think it's a fairly common phrase, a month of Sundays. A month of Sundays, I think it might be in James Joyce's Ulysses, and I'm sure it's a number of other places. But I thought of making a play off of that in that, Lou Mallet is facing game days pretty much 6 or sometimes 7 days a week. So, and then the idea was to have it to be one long month of game days. So that's the inspiration for the title.
That's great. So before we get into the Mallet family, I'm kind of curious about your own background with baseball. Did you play? Did you coach? What is your background?
Yes and yes. I played, growing up. And then I did coach my sons and my daughter when they played. And so, I drew on that experience as a coach, as a little league coach. But I also, I did play on a church league softball team, and we actually were 0-17 in the regular season. And so we built a lot of character there. It was our first season. And so Lou kind of has a parallel existence. It's not strictly autobiographical, but there are some autobiographical elements.
So this is not your first book. You wrote another book earlier, about 1890, about baseball and journalism at the time. How do you go from writing that to writing a book of short stories here? Is there a connection there? Do one thing lead to another? It seems like a pretty big leap.
I was a fiction writer from way back. And then, so I got my undergraduate degree in English and psychology. I got a master's degree, and I did a creative thesis for that. And then I had kind of a long break where I was working on writing and doing some publishing, but not publishing of books. And then I started doing research on a town team, well, kind of like Lou. There was a legend that the Orono Orioles, which was where the university was located, but it was a town team made up of players who worked at the local mills, had scrimmaged against the Boston Red Sox. And I just flat out said to myself, that couldn't happen, right? And it would never happen today, but 100 years ago, 110 years ago, it would, because the reserve clause was still in effect and players did not make a lot of money. And they were always looking for extra money, via barnstorming. So, and that led to my eventually getting a PhD, interdisciplinary PhD in sport literature, sport history, and sports journalism. I also uncovered this great story of a woman who came out of nowhere, Ella Black, to write for the Sporting Life in 1890. So again, I knew I'd go back and write about that season, because I didn't know that the players formed their own league in 1890, that they very nearly broke the reserve clause in 1890. So you can imagine what baseball would be like if they had succeeded in winning that conflict and driving the National League either out of business or forcing them to abandon the reserve clause and the restrictive labor practices 90 years before it actually happened in 1975.
That's great. That's really cool. You're involved with the Sports Literature Association, correct?
Yep. Yes, I was their fiction editor, and when I contribute to the conferences, I often read some fiction as well as a critical piece. So I kind of do, I've kind of done both things all along with the Sport Literature Association.
What is it about sports literature, and particularly baseball literature, that appeals to you? This is something that, running the Twin Bill for the last 5 years, I've been trying to figure out kind of, what is our role? What are we trying to do? What is the point of what I'm doing? And maybe you have more of an idea than I do here.
Well, that's, as fiction editor, when I started, it was about 25% of the stories that came in were baseball. So it was baseball against all other sports, essentially, and they were leading the field. And it was the same or maybe a little higher when I left 20 years later. So baseball is something that people, I think, just are drawn to when they're going to write about the game, because it has that long history of being the only major sport in America until the 60s, when the NFL came to prominence, and in the 70s with basketball, the NBA. And both of those came to prominence partially because they were televised, and they televise well, whereas baseball does not televise as well as those two other sports. And so there's this long tradition of writing about baseball. And then the period that I look at, the late 19th century and early 20th century, that's when those writers are writing sport, again, baseball, into American culture and having it be a big part of American culture. And it's not just, the athletic pursuits. There's all the other, there's economic issues, there's political issues, there's culture, there's social issues. And so again, the idea was to keep all of those out of sport, right? We keep politics out of my sports, right? But it's there, whether, you acknowledge it or not. And so I think, and one of the reasons I got into this field of sport literature was I found out that in Europe, they think that a way to understand America is through sports, because sports is such a big part of our culture. And so I thought, well, let's see what sports means to us Americans.
And I suppose now with the book, you are directly contributing to this tradition here, continuing to carry this on. And I will say that this book it's certainly a baseball book. Certainly a baseball book. No question about it. But it's not just a baseball book. There's a lot going on here, a lot of issues going on with the family, with the time. I want to talk about that time where you said it. 2004 in Maine. Obviously, there's this big thing that's about to happen, and the whole area is unaware about what's happened. Why set it in 2004 in Maine?
It's a really, obviously it was a monumental year, and it was the monumental event that almost didn't happen when the Sox went down 0-3 in the ALCS to the Yankees. And that's when I was coaching. And so I knew I would be able, and researching. And so I knew I could put in a lot of kind of background details that would help, make it seem real. And I guess I wanted it to be also the idea that Red Sox fans, when they find out it's 2004, will go, "Oh, okay, this is what's coming," right? And even though I don't get to that in the book. It's there in the background, is what I was trying for, especially for readers that are plugged into that year in New England.
I very much expected it to end with the World Series, and I was actually glad it didn't. I was actually very glad that it did. You didn't actually get to see those. It's those moments before the excitement, and you understand knowing as the reader what's going on. I loved that. I thought it'd been kind of cheap to end with the whole big celebration there. So I'm glad he didn't do it. Yeah.
Thanks. That's kind of moving away from the formula, right? The formula is you tell the story of one season and you end with the World Series, and then the whole goal is to get there.
I wanted to ask you about the Mallet family. Who are the Mallets?
Well, they're not a typical family because they're pretty caught up in baseball. And Lou has had the good fortune, or maybe the misfortune, to have a vet who has allowed him to kind of pursue all these interests and get as caught up in them as he is. I don't know. It's the brothers K. Do you know that? Duncan is and that's a similar kind of baseball family where the husband is just caught up in baseball, and he has 2 or 3 sons. It's been a long time since I've read it, but that was in the back of my mind while I was writing this collection. And also, I wanted to write about Little League, the league experience, from the coaches and the players' perspective. So in some ways they're typical, but in other ways they're not, right? But it is a family that is caught up in sports, and there are a lot of people in America that are very caught up in sports. Maybe not to the extent that the Mallets are, but they have a pretty close to a 24/7 baseball existence.
I would even argue that since 2004, Little League baseball has become even more intense. It's become even more of a crazy thing now. And Lou might have been kind of on the forefront of this 24/7 baseball experience for the youth level here.
Absolutely. I mean, when you have the Little League World Series televised every year from Williamsport, and we had kind of a unique situation in that Bangor, just south of Orono, Stephen King's hometown, was the host of the Senior League World Series. And so our Senior League teams were able to compete, because as the host city, their district got an automatic bid. And Orono was kind of a collection of small towns, and it was very difficult for them to field a team that could defeat Bangor. Bangor just had a stranglehold on the automatic bid. But there was the dream, right? Maybe this year's the year. Maybe this year we can go, to the Senior League World Series and be on ESPN. So that's also in the background of this narrative.
I want to go back to Lou for a minute. He is sort of the crux of the book, and there are a lot of connections to him, and he's kind of the driving force, I think, behind everything happening here in the book. Who is he? He's a baseball obsessive. He is also not a young guy. What can you say about Lou?
Yeah, you've got him there. He is a baseball obsessive. And again, he's got a wife that's allowed him to pursue these interests, the research, the umpire program to rehab, and he's the social worker at the rehab hospital, as well as his own teams, right, coaching their sons and then playing on the church league softball. So he's a part-time social worker. So he has time, part-time to be a father to his sons and coach and be there, but also pursue his other interests outside of the house. And yeah, he's in his early 40s. I think I've got him around 42. So he's that aging athlete, not quite ready to hang him up yet, and he's their pitcher. And I pitched as well, and it was always those line drives. Is this going to be the one that I don't get the glove up in time? And the favorite line was when I caught it, they would say, "Okay, you can open your eyes now." And of course, Finch is the counterpart. In the background, and kind of in the deep background, is James Joyce's Ulysses, which takes place all in one day in 1904, as opposed to 2004. And that was by design. I wanted it to be the novella to be all one day, so to pay homage to James Joyce, one of my favorite authors. So I borrowed some of the styles. So that's why we've got all these, the play at one point and the question and answer at another, and then the stream of consciousness in Bet's mind at the very end. So those are my 9 favorite styles from Ulysses that I've, again, paid homage to. But I had the good fortune to share the manuscript with a friend, another writer of baseball literature, Hank Garfield, who wrote Tartable's Throw. And that's kind of a time travel, werewolf, young adult baseball romance. All the genres he could put it. Anyway, he says, you got to be careful because there's so much Ulysses here, so much Joyce here that it may collapse under its own weight, especially if someone doesn't know Joyce. And so I worked really hard back off from the Joyce or the obvious Joyce references so that they were there if the reader knew Joyce, and then if they didn't, hopefully that they still enjoyed the story.
I picked up on them, and I wasn't sure if I was supposed to or not. So I'm glad that there was clearly a Joyce influence here. The intention behind that. It is a very literary book. It's a very well written book using a lot of different devices, and it's not just your play by play of a game. There's a lot of stylistic choices I think you make throughout the book. Does that all go back to Joyce, or was this kind of the intention from the get-go here?
I think I may have had, Dubliners in the back of my mind just because I really admire his style there. It's just so, stark and crisp. And again, he does the same sort of thing where many of the characters from Dubliners come back in Ulysses. And so I thought that would be kind of cool. So yeah, I think it was, especially as it started to coalesce. Again, Winesburg, Ohio has always been another one of my favorites just because it's just, I enjoy the repeating character and then these slices of small town life. And that was one of my goals too, was to have several slices of small town life. And again, I call it Webster, Maine, but it's patterned after Orono.
I want to talk about my favorite character in the book. Who is Finch?
Finch is, again, if Lou is patterned a little bit after Leopold Bloom, Finch is the Stephen Dedalus character, although he's actually the son of Bloom instead of the spiritual son in Joyce. So I didn't go right down the line with my homage. But he's a kind of a troubled young man. He's a good athlete. He got into trouble with controlled substances, opioids in particular. And so he lost his scholarship. And, he's estranged from his family, and yet he's living in the same town. I kind of wanted that to be one of the central tensions of the book of, here they are living in the same town, in the same neighborhood even, and they're really deeply estranged due to his substance abuse problem. And he's got some aspirations. He wants to be a poet. He's living in a garret with his friend from school, Amp Halligan, who's got aspirations to be an artist. So they're kind of, young men trying to be artists. Portrait of the Artist as a young man. So anyway, and again, he's trying to kick his substance abuse problem and doing it as an umpire. I don't know if that's the best approach, but I thought it was kind of novel, this idea of, rehabbing young men through the umpire program. But that also was kind of a very Lou Mount thing to do. He gets to, again, go to the ballpark one more way by, having his clients be umpires. So he's just all in for baseball. And Finch is, he several times he thinks back to, and there he is umpiring the games of his younger brothers who are still in, his father's good graces. And so he wants to be back there, but he can't figure out how to get there. So that's his major conflict.
I umpired, 10, 15 years. Growing up is my first job. It really, I found it to be a very relatable experience, especially growing up, not in a huge city or anything like that, but where I'm the umpire and I kind of know everyone there. And I know if I make a call that I'm going to hear about it from people that I knew. And that's very much his experience. And even more so because his dad, he umpires for not infrequently. Yeah.
Even though they're trying to, again, he tries not to, but here we go. The first time it was accidental, and then the league president takes over and mixes it up. Well, I'm glad that I haven't umpired. That's kind of the one thing I haven't done. It was pretty vicarious. I was the umpire supervisor for our league. So I did organize the, but I wasn't a social worker. Anyway, and but yeah, I know that you have to be decisive. That's kind of the one thing, make your call and be sure about it and sell it as, that's my call, sort of thing. So yeah, I'm glad I was the guy in the press box keeping score and doing the announcing in my little league. That was my first job. So I didn't get behind the plate or on the bases to umpire.
Was there anything particularly challenging about writing this book, and maybe a character that you struggled with, or for example, the umpiring thing is a great example there. Is there anything else that you kind of had doubts about?
One of the challenging things was I was the guy in the press box wanting to write about the game, so there was a lot of play-by-play that, again, my friend said, there's a lot of play-by-play. So I worked really hard to back off from that. And sometimes I worried that I didn't do enough, but it sounds like I did okay. I mean, a certain amount of play-by-play was important. So that was figuring out, okay, what play-by-play can stay because it's integral to, what I'm trying to show. Again, that first story, the conflict between Lou and Finch, that's in the background. And Finch as the umpire, Lou as the manager, they're at odds over, the way the game's being called. So a certain amount of play-by-play had to be there. So that was one of the big struggles. I also wanted to try and not make anybody into a cartoon supervillain, but I wanted there to be some people that were a little out of control at moments, because that happens too. So I just didn't want it to make anybody, all bad or all good. I just trying to make them, people that were caught up in the moment at a baseball.
One of the stories, there's a kid whose grandparent is coming to watch the game, and he says, I'm going to go 3 for 3. I can totally picture this. I can see this. And there's a little bit of a conflict that goes around this, which seems like a very little league experience. Was that drawn from anything, or was that something that you kind of came up with on your own there?
No, it was drawn from experience as a coach, and wanting to give everybody playing time where they wanted playing time, but also wanting to win, which I probably tried to do too much as a little league manager. It's that kind of, development versus winning, right? The little league dilemma. And so, yeah, that was kind of the younger set, right? The 12s and under. But the narrator of that story is Tom Phillips, Lou's assistant manager, who very much wants his son to be able to play second base while his grandfather is there, who played second base for the college. I didn't have that particular dilemma, but I kind of, imagined, extrapolated, from the actual experience.
Have you reflected on your own coaching after writing this book and thought, like, I did this really well, or I wish I did this differently, now that you've kind of sat down and actually written this stories?
I'm afraid so. I tried to win too much. I wanted to win too much. I mean, again, I wanted everybody to have a good time, and I wanted them to learn something. That was genuine. But I also, wanted to have a high seed for the playoffs or whatever. So yeah, I guess if I had to do it again, I wouldn't be so worried about winning. It is just little league.
Writing baseball is a very specific thing, as you talk about with the play-by-play, how much to put in, how much to leave out. That's a constant struggle, I think, because people want to give you the details. They want to go pitch by pitch. But I think at the end of the day, it is about the stories behind it. It's about the people behind it so much. Was it a specific challenge to write baseball stories for you?
I've been writing a lot of baseball fiction. Once I got involved with the sport literature, I found out that was my niche.
Right.
I knew baseball. I wanted to tell stories about baseball, but also tell stories about people. Right? And that line about sports revealing character is something I really kept in mind as my watchwords when I was the fiction editor of Athlon. Not only does it obviously develop character, but what aspects of character does it reveal in those key moments? And that's kind of a natural storytelling element, right? Revealing character. So,
sure.
I guess this was the big challenge, was finding that balance between writing for a baseball audience that really, wants to dive into the details, but not diving too deep that I lose the people that don't, the readers that don't want to go so deep into the game.
Yeah. I guess this is my last question for you. Is there going to be more? Are you going to write any more baseball works here?
I'm working on a couple historical kind continuation of the 1890. I actually have written a fictionalized version of Ella Black because we didn't know that much about her until recently. I've also written about the 1922 World Series, which I kind of dived into because I wanted to just basically take the reader to the 1922 World Series. And
Yankees
I could.
Giants, right? Yankees
Yankees
Giants?
Giants, yes.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, take three, right? Take two of three, right? 21, 22, and 23 were Yankees Giants all in a row. Speaking of the old stadium, it opened in 23, and that was the third, and that was the one the Yankees finally won. And again, it was almost pitch by pitch, the account in the newspapers of inning by inning. So I found I could reconstruct the game just through the accounts in the newspapers. And that's kind of led me to, I'm actually working on another one set in 1924 where the aftermath, I think there's kind of some suspicious things going on. The Yankees had both the pitching and the hitting, and they lost in 5 games. One of them was a tie called under mysterious circumstances, whereas the Giants only had the hitting and one really good pitcher. And so, but they won all 4 games. And then regarding month of game days, one of my readers said, I kind of would like to know what came before and what comes after. And so I actually have another collection that I finished writing beforehand and wasn't able to find published before. But some of those stories are also set in Webster. So I went back and reread them, and I've started to begin to see how I could rewrite those stories and use some of them as prequel material and some of them as sequel material. So in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm not done with this. Maybe, and there are stories that for instance, Finch and Flora, who meet towards the end of the novel. I'm thinking, that could be a nice story. And then maybe what if Bet finds a way? She has a physical therapy business. What if she finds a way to rehab Lou's pitching arm, and maybe he could do a comeback with the Bangor lumber barons in his late 30s. So I'm thinking that might be a good prequel story. So yeah, maybe I don't know. We'll see.
That's very exciting. I truly loved the book, and I think that for fans of baseball, especially baseball literature, they will very much enjoy this book. And I can't say enough good things about it. I truly loved it.
Well, thank you. It sounds like you're my ideal audience.
That was Scott D. Peterson. His novel, A Month of Day Games, is out now. Coming on to close us out is Robert Wallace, reading an excerpt from his short story, 1,001 Innings, from our latest issue.
This is an excerpt from Robert Wallace's 1,001 Innings. Coach Womack punched fly balls to the outfield, spreading them to all fields, sometimes splitting the seams. Suzanne decided to be aggressive today. All day long after leaving the nursing home, she felt some kind of urgency, as if she had drunk too much coffee. She had kept on the move, unable to sit down, her body twitching and spinning with worry about her father. Being in the outfield, running down the fly balls, helped her to think of something else. She loved practicing with the cats, especially in warm days like today, when the sky was cloudless and the pop flies seemed to soar in the blue air like plump white birds. Today, everyone seemed to feel it. Suzanne wouldn't use the word magical, but watching the fungo-batted balls soaring languidly in the outfield, each arcing celestially, like it lived and breathed in the sky, and the repetition of the ball gently landing in each outfielder's glove, made it all feel like prayer, something incantational. Suzanne looked at Grace in left field and Ruby in center, and she wondered if they felt what she was feeling. But when a fly was hit to right center, Suzanne ran hard to snag it. Ruby had the superior speed, but Suzanne had a beat on it, and she raced to get there first. The ball zoomed toward the warning track. Suzanne heard Ruby calling for it, but she ignored her. Determined to catch it, Suzanne reached for it, but Ruby undercut her and snagged it just as the ball came down. Suzanne twisted at the last second. As Ruby brushed by her, she felt something snap in her left hamstring. Momentarily, Suzanne went down on the dirt, but pride caused her to jump back up. She immediately began to limp, and she knew she had injured herself.
We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast and publish around 50 writers every year in the Twinbill Literary Journal. Until next time,